So this is a short guide on how to do plotting inside Tablexplore. So we start off with a simple sample data set of 10 rows. This is just dummy data. There's a label column here. The way it works is simply whatever we select in the table and press plot, that's what's plotted. So it's quite easy to get plots up and running. I can zoom in and out to enlarge some of the table elements. I can change the line style, for example, dash line. I can change the marker size. I can choose a marker. Then when I replot, you can see that the plot looks quite different. I can change the color map that's used to render the plots. Some of the colors won't show depending on what you choose. And I can change the style of the plots, which are predefined themes, which may be useful for quickly changing how the plots look to your liking. So those are line plots. The other type of basic plot is a scatter plot, and then the other is a bar plot. So if I go back to line plots briefly, we notice that there's an x-axis here and there are two series. So both columns are being plotted as lines, hence both columns appear as series in the legend. But what are they being plotted against here? They're being plotted against the index of the table. Every table has a row index, which is what appears here in the left row header. And that's by default just a set of zero-based integer values from 0 upwards. And whatever we plot, it will use them. I actually can arbitrarily select any column as an index, so I can select the label column here and say set as index. Now you see it appears in the row header instead. And when I press plot here again now, reselect and press plot, you'll notice these values are appearing in the x-axis instead. I can reset the index here, and that it reappears again, the label, as a column. So it's just useful to know that, as it might be a source of confusion. We can, if I replot again, you get the same thing. But if I go to this option here, use index in the plot options, and switch it off, we can remove that behavior. And now what it's doing is it's taking the first column instead and plotting them. And that is actually the default behavior of the scatter plot, because that's generally what you'd be trying to do. You'd be plotting one column against others. So what this is doing, the scatter plot, it plots the first column against the other two. And we can maybe make this a little clearer by changing the colors. Now we can change the axis layout to multiple. And what this does is, for the basic plot types, it splits them up into sub plots or axes. So when I replot this now, is we get two separate subplots of the two series being plotted against the first column. And the same applies to line plots. We get 3 here because we're plotting against the index. And the same applies to bar plots. So the bar plots here are split. When I restore the single axis type, our bars are plotted as normal. We can also have stacked bars, and we can also have horizontal bars. So that's the main basic plot types. These other plot types here are for distributions. So to illustrate this, I'll make another sample sheet with 100 rows instead, and then select the first column. When we plot that, we get our line plot, because all the plot options are separate for each sheet. And now I choose a histogram, and that gives me the distribution of this this column. And then when I can also change the number of bins in the histogram in this setting here. And if I choose multiple columns, I get a separate distribution for each column. And in this case, they're all in one plot, so they're overlapping. And if you want to be able to make them clearer, you can change the transparency with this alpha value here, and that may be more suitable to what you need. Or what may be more useful is we can also use a multiple axes for histograms, and we get a plot like this. Now there are other distribution types of plots, like a box plot, and they work pretty much as you'd expect. A violin plot, which shows you the shape of the distributions, and multiple subplots don't apply to these ones, and a dot plot. A heat map is created by simply taking all the values that are selected. So if I take a very small selection here and replot, the heat map simply makes a grid out of the values I've selected. So the columns are the x-axis here in this case, and the row values are the row index. And there's also, I forgot to mention, an area plot, which is basically a line plot with filled. Those are the basic plot types, and I'll leave it at that for now. I just want to talk about the grouping of plots. So if you go back to this plot, or actually maybe we'll use this one again, plots can be grouped by a label column or some kind of categorical column. So say I make this selection in this table here, and I go back to my line plot and replot. So we get the usual plot that I've been talking about. And actually, in fact, let's use less columns so it's clearer. So we have two columns being plotted here. Now, say I want to group by the label column and split the data into those categories, these different colors. I simply go to the group by drop-down menu, and I choose label and replot, and that gives me a distribution of the values over each category that I've grouped by. What might be more useful is to switch this to a multiple subplots, and now what we're doing is we're taking each grouped category, the data as one, and plotting it in its own subplot. We can also do the same thing with a bar plot. So that essentially splits the data by the category that we've grouped by. We can group by two sets of columns if necessary, although it might create rather complex plots. So I think we get the idea from this. Then the last thing to discuss is simple styling or simple formatting of text elements. So and axes. So for labels, I'm going to switch back to a single plot and just make a very simple, switch off grouping here. Just make a simple bar plot. And our labels tab here in the plot options allows us just to change the font and add a title and add access labels as well. So when we replot, then changing the font size increases these elements, or zooming in and out also does the same thing. And then axes is designed for manipulating when we want to make specific changes to X and Y limits of data ranges, change the number of ticks. The ticks correspond to the number of data elements you have on each axis, and the grid, how the grid will be displayed. So maybe to illustrate the axis, one function of the axis is to, when we have multiple subplots like this, we have three plots here, say we want to rearrange them to have them in 3 rows on top of each other, we simply go to axes and we change it to 3 and number of columns to 1, and that plots them like this instead. So we can change the layout of the axes, and we can also choose share X if we want to remove these redundant labels here, because they're all the same, because remember in this case we're plotting against the axis, the index here, and that removes this redundancy. And the share Y will do the same thing for the Y axis. So you'll notice now when I press this, it rescales some of these because they're all using the same axis, so they're scaled to the largest set of data. So that's plotting in Data Explorer.